I'm coming to you as a founding board member of the Rise Fund. I'm excited to have a member of the Rise community with me today as well, Tom Davidson, who is the founder and CEO of EverFi, a business that I have really admired. It was the first portfolio investment for the Rise Fund, and today we have over 30 investments. Tom and I are going to sit and not have an interview, but have a conversation. We have some mutual interests that I think it'll be fun to talk about, the most important of which is education. And I thought it would be fun for us to reveal our interests and the work that we're doing through this discussion in a way to give some more insights into how the Rise community works. So I'll start just by asking you, Tom. We both started in our careers. We got right to work after graduating from college. But instead of going to business, you ran for the Maine House of Representatives. You actually won and served a few terms doing that before you started EverFi. How did you go from Maine politics to EverFi?
Well, I think, first of all, it's wonderful to be with you. And I think there are a lot of people still scratching their heads as to how I got elected, not the least of which my family. But I loved every minute of it. I loved my time in the Maine legislature, and it just taught me a ton about the issues that I'm working on today. It really struck me that there was this very, very deep and missing learning layer of education that I thought was honestly crazy that we didn't have in schools. And that really came out of that work of just going door to door, community to community, sitting in hundreds of classrooms across the state of Maine over the course of about 6 years.
So because of that, you end up with this very different perspective that most CEOs have. I don't have it, where you have a unique lens around public policy. I have a little bit of it because I attended the School of International Relations at Princeton and we did our work around public policy issues. But you actually were a practitioner in government first and then carried over those insights into business. Tell us how you bring those worlds together and what you see the opportunity as the opportunity.
Sure. Well, I had the unique advantage of sitting through hours and hours of school funding formula conversations, debate on the House floor, and ultimately tax policy, which, Mellody, as you know, drives so much of the localized nature of our funding for education. It really occurred to me coming out of that experience that the deck was pretty stacked against kids, and particularly kids in high poverty areas, that if you came from a community that had a high tax base, if you came from a community that had what I call these like exoskeletal foundations and private foundations and areas that could supplement that education, you were going to have resources that most kids in the country don't. And that was really the driver of the business model. Was it just occurred to me that the way that we fund schools in this country is fundamentally broken, and that we needed to create a system that brought the private sector deeply into that conversation. At the same time, what you found was in school districts that had the means, had things like financial literacy education and student loan preparation and test prep and all of these various things that, again, the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of school districts that didn't have those resources were never going to have. And so you had to really create a circuit breaker for that and create a funding mechanism that made the private sector step into that void. And that's a big part of our business model, what we've done at EverFi.
So tell me a little bit more about how it works, because you have partnered with major universities, your corporate partners, school districts, as you've already said. You were way ahead of your time with some of your programming, and including things like substance abuse and just a whole host of issues. We have a series of societal ills that have landed on the doorstep of corporate America, and they've long been on the doorstep of government. But just bring it all together to explain how it actually works.
Sure. So it starts with a big, hairy problem that seems intractable. So, $1.5 trillion of student debt or opioid addiction, and particularly in our rural communities. It starts with the massive racial wealth gap in the country, the lack of retirement and savings. So what's kind of fun about it is I walk in every day and I tend to throw up a problem on the board and say, how would we deal with food insecurity for kids? Or how would I deal with the lack of understanding of the marketplaces and next generation payment services that are going to once again be, if we don't do it right and create that learning layer in schools, another area where a whole portion of our society is left out. And so what we did was we also knew that because education is so hyper localized, so what we did was we went to the private sector and said, you license this, pay 100% of the cost of this for schools and communities that you care about. And what's been fascinating about that is we've now convened 3,100 of the biggest organizations, and it's Uber and LinkedIn and Amazon and Google, and it's Target and Walmart and the big box retailers. It's all of the major financial services firms, and even the NFL and NBA and others who have stepped in to fund that for communities coast to coast.
Tom, when I think about the work that you're doing, I think about hard issues that you're addressing. And one that is front and center right now that has really come to people's attention in a very different way. Maybe not so much for people of color, but certainly for the broader community, is the social unrest we saw this summer. How does EverFi address these societal issues around social injustice, social unrest, and the like?
Yeah, I mean, this was in many ways, Mellody, when we started the business 12 years ago, it really was to go into communities that we felt had been left behind from an education perspective. So when we started in the Alabama Black Belt, the Mississippi Delta, a lot of really communities that we just fell in love with. And what we found was that there were just these cycles that kept repeating themselves generationally around payday lending and short-term lending and these just crushing amounts of debt. And we felt like if we could create something that took place at a very young age, that taught kids the basics of finance, that used technology to create it in a way that was not just instructional, but fun and really met students where they and their families lived, that you could create an intergenerational conversation, which to me is what this is all about. And what was important also was that we didn't just do that in silos, that you actually created something across the country that became a movement. So what's extraordinary about now is there are 6.2 million students this year who will go through our software and get trained around really specific areas, how marketplaces work, how you create wealth, how compounding can create wealth for you and your family, how you can create an intergenerational conversation around these topics. And then what we did eventually was we took that into other areas. We focused on the types of data science skills that you'd need to be able to have at your fingertips to have those financial services jobs, and continued to layer again and again and again. And I think it was really just brought to bear this summer that this was something actionable that we could do, that we could actually turn this on in communities coast to coast tomorrow. That while there were going to be, it took us 400 plus years to get to this moment, but that these were things that actionable. They can be in schools tomorrow. And I think that's what's really important about this moment for EverFi.
What I love about what you said is that it hits the problem head on. You're not standing around admiring it, talking about it. You're actually doing something about it, which is very, very rare. And as you started the conversation talking about payday lending and all of those things, it just reminded me of a line that I heard from a friend that is so true when you think about basically some of the usury practices that exist. A friend of mine said to me, it's very expensive to be poor. And it really does speak to how do you address that inequality just around basic financial services and leveling the playing field. But you've also been doing it on diversity training, which it was when I thought about it, I hadn't thought about the fact that most people don't have diversity training until they're in a corporate setting. And you're taking it into a schoolroom setting. How is that working?
Yeah, it's been, I just tell you, I get chills even thinking about it because we started our first African American history course years ago, 7 years ago in schools, and it was really meant to be the beginning of that conversation. Behind that, we built a compassion course with Jeff Weiner from LinkedIn to really go after teaching kids how to be compassionate to one another. And what we found was the 1-2 punch of those beginning in second, fourth grade, probably a bad analogy for a compassion class, but When kids learned about their experience, when kids learned to be empathetic and compassionate to each other, then we layered that again and again and again. And what's happened is by the time a lot of our students, and we get these letters from kids who say, gosh, man, I got into my first job or I took my first diversity and inclusion course at college. I felt like I'd been doing this for 12 or 13 years and had that conversation. It was a really comfortable conversation, which is weird, because all of us are like, deeply uncomfortable having these conversations. They're uncomfortable at the Thanksgiving table, let alone with a bunch of strangers that you go to work with. And so I think that it really reinforced the fact that, again, this needs to exist in grade schools and middle schools and high schools, so that when you get there, it's not just some frying pan that hits you in the head with this very difficult conversation. And I think that's a big contribution of what we're trying to pull off.
I never thought about that before, but there is a great parallel between the financial literacy and the diversity discussion, and that the earlier the better of both of them. You're basically establishing language that will help people navigate financial literacy language and concepts, as well as diversity language and concepts. So I really do appreciate that parallel in a way that I just had not thought about it before.
Well, what's kind of cool from both I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, you go.
I was just going to say, like, what those two have in common is we often learn those by just making mistakes, and that's kind of, if it's not a very optimal way to learn. Like, I learned financial literacy by destroying my credit. I learned financial literacy by taking out exorbitant amounts of debt to finance my time through the state legislature. That wasn't a very fun thing. And when I, trashed my credit, missed payments, those things, they were not fun. They were very costly. And similarly, like, you can run into that in the diversity and inclusion conversations as well. And that can be taken care of over a period of time to condition that conversation in an easier way.
Yeah, this is the conversation I've had for years. The mere fact that you can take woodshop or auto in a high school and not take a class on investing. I always say, who whittles in their spare time, right? I mean, it's just like who cleans their own carburetor. It's the craziest idea ever. So your point is well taken. Learning by doing in this regard is very, very dangerous. I often say with financial literacy, it's like giving someone a keys to a Corvette and a quart of Jack Daniels and telling them go out and have a good time. There's no driver's ed in that situation.
Correct.
But my final question to you is, you took the leap of becoming an entrepreneur, and I am an entrepreneur as well, although Ariel was started 8 years before I went to the firm. What would you say to aspiring entrepreneurs out there about taking the leap? Is there a certain sort of constitution you think you have to do the job of an entrepreneur? And then lastly, a pile on to that is, what would you say to them about being entrepreneurs that pursue impact and profits?
Sure. Yeah, I think the best piece of advice that I feel I either got or I really believe in is the idea matters a great deal. And I always tell people, make sure it's an idea that you're willing to run through a brick wall for, because trust me, like, you will be asked to run through that brick wall, not just a few times during the course of your journeys. As it relates to the impact side, I just believe it's pretty nice to be in a place where the world needs you, and the world needs companies in this. And I tell that to people all the time. Don't apologize for trying to build a company going after very big problems. We celebrate people all the time for building big companies, creating wealth, and creating jobs and everything, who go after, that don't go after building impact businesses. Don't apologize for it. Wear it proudly. And recognize that it does increase the degree of difficulty a little bit to try and not just, in our case, build a really enduring software business, but also try and tackle 10 or 15 trillion dollar problems that exist in the world, and recognize that.
Yeah, well, I 100% agree with you. There was that line: all progress depends upon the unreasonable man, or woman. The entrepreneur is that person. You have to have a level of unreasonableness because you're dreaming something that oftentimes people don't see. And so you have to be willing to go to the mat for it. Tom, one thing I was wondering about, you're doing remarkable work in so many communities. I just have a question about how do you think about measuring that impact? How do you do that?
Sure. So it's a little different. We've got about 15 core areas that we focus on, and they range from sexual violence prevention on college campuses all the way over to financial literacy instruction in middle schools and grade schools. Uh, so, one of the things that we think it's important to do is to do real A/B studies on our campuses and have an arm's length organization like the University of Massachusetts. We've had a number of organizations study the deployment of our sexual assault prevention software on college campuses and measure the number of incidents that are reported, the number of violent incidents that are reported, and measure that over a long period of time on the campuses. As it relates to students who are taking like our student loan management course, our financial literacy course, that's done over a longer period of time. We do climate surveys 3 or 4 times a year to measure student behaviors. We do pre and post assessments at the beginning and the end of the year. And in the long run, the goal is to measure as students graduate to take certain control sets of those and measure their exposure to certain amounts of debt, credit score attainment, and areas like that. So it's a little different, in areas like teaching compassion. It'll be based on a very different metric, but it is all based on a prevention framework that we've learned over quite a long period of time now. Do you mind if I turn the tables on you a little bit here?
Sure, go for it.
Awesome. So listen, we both share this passion about financial literacy. What you probably don't know that we share also is I was the youngest boy, only boy in a family of six, with 5 older sisters kind of coming up. I was reading about you. I knew that you focused early on understanding money. I was just trying to survive. So I give you tons of credit for having that forethought. But why do you think it's important for kids to get their arms around this? And where did that curiosity come from for you that we can get that leverage on for other kids down the road?
Well, that is a remarkable coincidence that we're both the youngest of 6 kids. That's funny.
Right.
And I had one brother and 4 sisters. So I joke with people that I had a lot of mothers. I'm
Right.
really young in my family. So my siblings are a couple decades older than me. So I did not have traditional sibling relationships and still don't to this day.
Right.
Um, where I think this, first of all, for me, my interest in understanding money was rooted in financial insecurity and just the volatility that I grew up with around money, which was oftentimes being in a tough financial position. My mom was a single mom, and it really I became very, very resigned to the fact that I would not grow up and have a life that way. Just resigned. And the only way that I could think about it is I said, if I understand money, then this won't happen to me again. And it's interesting because there's a nuance here. I didn't say I was desperate to make a lot of money. I said desperate to understand it because I thought if I understood it, I'd know how to spend it, save it, treat it appropriately, and be safe and secure. And that is the genesis of my beliefs around financial literacy. That I felt like once I became literate, I became free, truly free. It might all go away, but I know how to manage and I know how to think about money in a very, very different way, and hopefully one that is responsible. And I became obsessed with the idea of helping others get to that same place. It's not the number, it's how you manage it. And that became super clear to me very, very early on. It's really fueled my work at Ariel in serving our clients who are big institutions and individuals and the like, but also it's fueled my passion for making the rest of our society financially literate.
Such a cool way to think about it. I love it. Also, one of the things that you said once, you talked about this switching subjects a little to this like conversational third rail, which hit me so much because I think about our work in sexual violence prevention, opioid addiction. These are not conversations that you walk in and gleefully address with people. They're difficult. They're tough. They have huge tentacles into people's lives. I think it's safe to say, you've been a unique and probably somewhat lonely voice on inclusion on boards, inclusion in the corporate, and this conversational third rail has found its way to the boardroom, I think, for the first time, at least in my lifetime, that I've seen in any kind of meaningful way. Can you talk about what you think about this moment and what companies should be thinking about, in this moment in time after what we've seen in the last 6 or 7 months?
Well, first and foremost, I've been calling this Civil Rights 3.0. So I think 1.0 was the Emancipation Proclamation, 2.0 was the 1960s with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And I think this is 3.0. And the unique difference about this time, because what has been going on in our society is not new. The killing of George Floyd is not new. It happens every day. Difference being now we have cameras in our pockets. But what is meaningfully different about 3.0 of this civil rights era is that it has landed at the feet of corporate America. Before it was a government problem, and we saw government solutions, which is why when we turn on our televisions today, we can see black and brown mayors. But today, we don't see black and brown CEOs of public companies. There are only 4 black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies today, and not one of them is a woman. So we have a shockingly long way to go when it comes to corporate America, and corporate America is feeling the heat. Because the one thing about the viral nature of our society, everyone is now accountable. And people will hold corporations accountable in very different ways. Their employees, their customers, as well as just the broader society. And on this issue of race and diversity, I think corporate America has had decades of talk, and now it's time for action. And because the action is desperate to and important to survival, I think people are getting it in a much different way than they ever got it before. Now, this isn't the only societal ill at corporate America's feet. I mean, who would have thought we'd be doing live shooter drills in companies or have mental health benefits for people? So it is a new day in terms of corporate America, but I think this one specifically is mission critical. We have to get it right.
And maybe lastly here, Mellody, but for both of us, we were lucky enough to be the first investment in the Rise Fund, I guess about 3 years ago, and it's been a fantastic journey for us. What was it about being? You obviously could have done a million things. What is it about being a part of this from the beginning and on the founders board of Rise Fund that allows you, that got you interested along the way?
I'll start off with the leadership and the vision. They were aligned with my core beliefs, and they were passionate. The individuals that are running the fund and who have birthed this idea, they are passionate about it. It's not just something to do today, but recognizing the importance and significance of this fund and how it might set the tone for the rest of the industry was something that I really, really appreciated and took very seriously. I also thought the opportunity to be aligned with people that not only would create an environment for me to contribute based upon my own experiences and impact investing at Ariel over the last 28 years, but also to learn together was something that I thought would be a phenomenal opportunity and is not disappointed. And last but not least, the opportunity to interface with entrepreneurs like you, who are like-minded people, who are on a mission to make the world a better place like I am, and who are actually doing amazing, amazing work with great results that inspire me to keep going in some of those challenging times. That too is something that really I get as much as I give in this situation. And I should not have overlooked one also very important point: to make money. As a limited partner in the funds, this was about alpha generation, not just do-gooderism, which is important. We're aligning our values to profits and showing people that capitalism can have new and different faces and create new and impactful opportunities.
That's so great. Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be doing this with you, and so appreciate the time.
Well, thanks, Tom. It's been so great to sit down with you. I only wish that we could be in person, but for now, this will have to do. And until I see you in person, take very good care. Great to be with you.
Thanks so much.